Imagine being born into a world that wasn't made for you. A world where the color of your skin determines your destiny before you even take your first breath. This was the world of Sarah Breedlove, who was born on December 23, 1867, on a small cotton plantation near Delta, Louisiana. Sarah was the first in her family to be born free. Her parents, Owen and Minerva, had been enslaved on that same plantation, working under the scorching sun, their hands bleeding as they picked cotton that would never belong to them. But something had changed. The Civil War had ended, and the Emancipation Proclamation had given her family something that seemed impossible just a few years before: freedom. But what kind of freedom was this? At 4 years old, Sarah lost her mother. At 7, she was completely orphaned. The girl who should have been playing, dreaming, discovering the world, was now in the hands of an older sister, being taken to Mississippi, where life would be no less cruel. Sarah knew work before she knew childhood. Her small hands learned to wash other people's clothes in cold water, to pick cotton until her fingers ached, to wake up before sunrise and sleep long after it set. She attended school for only 3 months. 3 months! That was all the investment the world was willing to make in a poor black girl in the American South. And then came marriage. At 14, Sarah got married, not for love, not by real choice, but to escape, to flee from the abuse of a violent brother-in-law. Because sometimes when you're cornered, any open door seems like an exit, even if it leads to another dark place. At 18, she was already a mother. Her daughter, Eulalia, was her light amid the darkness. But at 20, Sarah was a widow. Her husband had died, and she was alone again, with a child to raise and no resources beyond her own hands. Sarah then made a decision that would change her life. She moved to St. Louis, Missouri, where her brothers worked as barbers. There, she joined thousands of other black women who did what they could to survive. She washed clothes. For little more than $1 a day, she scrubbed, wrung, ironed, and folded clothes for white families who would never see her as more than a maid. But something was happening to Sarah that went beyond physical exhaustion. Her hair began to fall out, not just a few strands, but in large amounts. The grueling work, poor nutrition, constant stress, the harsh chemicals she used without knowing, all of this was taking its toll. For many, this might seem like a small problem, but for Sarah, for a black woman in a society that already diminished her in every possible way, losing her hair was losing a part of her dignity. It was one more thing the world was taking from her. And it was at this moment, at the lowest point of her life, that Sarah did something revolutionary. She decided she would no longer accept that. She decided she deserved more. She decided to fight. Sarah began searching for solutions. She visited pharmacies, tried products, talked to other women who faced the same problem. She discovered she wasn't alone. Thousands of black women suffered from hair loss and scalp problems, the result of years of inadequate products and lack of specific care for their hair types. It was during this period of searching that something magical happened. Sarah attended St. Paul's Baptist Church, where she met people who inspired her and connected her with new possibilities. At a fair, she was introduced to Annie Turnbow Malone, a black businesswoman who manufactured hair care products. Sarah was fascinated. Here was a woman who looked like her, who understood her struggles, and who had created a successful business. Sarah began working as a saleswoman for Annie Malone. She knocked on doors, talked to women, demonstrated products, and for the first time in her life, Sarah wasn't just working to survive, she was learning. She absorbed everything: how the products were made, how to sell, how to build relationships with customers, how to manage a business. But Sarah had something special. She had empathy. She wasn't just selling products, she was selling hope. When she looked into the eyes of a woman with hair problems, she saw herself. And when she shared her own story of loss and recovery, Women didn't just see a saleswoman, they saw a sister. In 1905, Sarah moved to Denver, Colorado, where her brother worked as a barber. It was there, working as a cook during the day and experimenting with hair formulas at night, that Sarah began developing her own product line. She used the knowledge she had acquired, but added her own intuition, her own experience, her own touch. And then, in 1906, at 38 years old, Sarah Breedlove made a decision that would change not just her life, but American history. She married Charles Joseph Walker, a man who worked selling newspaper advertisements, and adopted the name by which she would be known forever, MADAM C.J. Walker. But more important than the name was what it represented. Madam was a title of respect, of dignity, of class. In a society that insisted on calling her girl or by her first name, regardless of her age, Sarah chose a name that demanded respect. She was no longer just Sarah Breedlove, the washwoman, the orphan, the poor widow. She was Madam C.J. Walker, and she was about to build an empire. Charles Walker wasn't just her husband, he was her business partner. He understood marketing, advertising, sales. Together, they created a bold strategy. Madam Walker would travel through the South, visiting churches, community organizations, and homes, demonstrating her products and recruiting saleswomen. And Madam Walker had an advantage that no other cosmetics company had. She herself was the living advertisement for her products. When she told her story of a woman who had lost her hair and regained her self-esteem through her products, people listened. Because she wasn't just selling shampoo and pomades, she was selling transformation. But the path was not easy. Madam Walker faced resistance everywhere. She sought investors and was repeatedly rejected. Bankers looked at her, a black woman without formal education, and laughed at the idea that she could build a successful business. Some said black women didn't have money to spend on beauty products. Others simply couldn't imagine a black woman as a successful businesswoman. But each rejection only strengthened Madam Walker's determination. If no one was going to invest in her, she would invest in herself. She started small, producing her products in her own kitchen, packaging them with her own hands, selling them door to door. And something incredible began to happen. The products worked. Women who had given up on having healthy hair began to see results, and these women told their friends, who told their sisters, who told their neighbors. Word of mouth spread like fire. In 1908, Madam Walker made a bold decision that many considered madness. She opened an office in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and began training women to become Walker agents. This was a revolutionary concept for the time. She wasn't just selling products, she was creating employment and entrepreneurship opportunities for black women. The Walker agents received complete training. Madam Walker taught not only how to use and sell the products, but also about hygiene, skin care, professional posture, and financial management. For many of these women, who had spent their lives working as domestic servants or in fields, this was the first opportunity to own their own business, to have financial autonomy, to dream of something bigger. Madam Walker created what we today call multi-level marketing, but with a crucial difference. She genuinely cared about the success of her agents. She saw them not just as employees, but as partners, as sisters in the struggle for dignity and independence. And the women felt this. They didn't work just for Madam Walker, they worked with her. In 1910, Madam Walker made her next big step. She moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, and built her own factory. Not an improvised kitchen, but a real factory, with modern equipment, a laboratory, an attached beauty salon. The MADAM C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company was officially born. Imagine the audacity of this. A woman who had been born on a cotton plantation, who had been orphaned at 7, who had washed clothes for $1 a day, now owned a factory. She employed dozens of people, produced thousands of product units per month, and her brand was spreading across the country. But success brought new challenges. The cosmetics industry, dominated by white men, didn't know what to do with Madam Walker. Some tried to copy her. Others tried to discredit her, spreading rumors that her products were dangerous or ineffective. There were even those who accused Madam Walker of trying to make black women look white, of denying her own heritage. These accusations deeply hurt Madam Walker. She had never said that black women should look white. Her products weren't about straightening hair to conform to white standards. They were about hair health, about giving black women options, about allowing them to care for themselves with dignity. Madam Walker faced these criticisms head-on. She gave lectures, wrote articles, spoke in churches. She explained that her products were about empowerment, not about assimilation. It was about giving black women the freedom to choose how they wanted to present themselves to the world. At the height of her success, Madam C.J. Walker didn't forget where she came from. While many successful business people distanced themselves from their humble origins, Madam Walker embraced hers. She understood that her story wasn't just hers. It was the story of millions of black people in America who struggled against systems designed to keep them down. And it was with this understanding that Madam Walker became one of the most generous philanthropists of her time. She donated to black schools, including Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee Institute. Despite their earlier disagreement, she recognized the importance of his work. She contributed to Bethune-Cookman College, an institution founded by Mary McLeod Bethune specifically to educate black women. Madam Walker supported orphanages, nursing homes, literacy programs. She sponsored young artists and musicians. She financed the construction of a YMCA building in Indianapolis, one of the first organizations to offer recreational programs for black youth. But her philanthropy went beyond money. Madam Walker used her influence, her voice, her platform. In 1917, when terrible racial massacres occurred in East St. Louis, where dozens of black people were killed by white mobs, Madam Walker didn't remain silent. She traveled to Washington, D.C., and led a delegation to pressure President Woodrow Wilson to take action against racial violence. When Wilson refused to receive her, Madam Walker didn't give up. She organized marches, wrote letters, made speeches. She used her resources to support civil rights organizations, including the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Madam Walker understood something fundamental. True freedom wasn't just economic, it was political and social too. It wasn't enough to have money if you could still be lynched, if your children were still educated in segregated and inferior schools, if you were still treated as a second-class citizen. In 1918, during World War I, when the American government asked business people to support the war effort, Madam Walker was among the first to respond. She bought war bonds in large quantities and encouraged her agents to do the same. She wanted to show that black people were patriots, loyal citizens who contributed to their nation, even when that nation often didn't return that loyalty. But the intense pace was taking its toll. Madam Walker traveled constantly, worked long hours, carried the weight of a growing business and multiple social causes. Her health began to deteriorate. She suffered from hypertension, a condition aggravated by stress and a relentless schedule. Her doctors advised her to slow down, to rest, to delegate more. But how could she? There was still so much to do, so many women still needing opportunities, so many injustices still needing to be fought. In 1918, Madam Walker's health worsened significantly. She spent her last months at Villa Lewaro, surrounded by her daughter, Alelia, and close friends. Even on her deathbed, she continued planning, dreaming, thinking about the future of her business and her community. Madam C.J. Walker passed away on May 25, 1919, at 51 years of age. When she died, she left a fortune estimated at over $1 million, the equivalent of tens of millions today. The Guinness Book of World Records would later recognize her as the first American woman to become a self-made millionaire. But numbers don't capture Madam Walker's true legacy. Her true legacy was the thousands of women she employed and empowered. Walker agents weren't just saleswomen, they were entrepreneurs, owners of their own businesses. Many of them used their earnings to buy homes, educate children, start other businesses. Some became leaders in their communities, activists, teachers. Her legacy was proving that a black woman could build a business empire in an America that insisted this was impossible. She didn't wait for permission, didn't accept the limitations that society tried to impose. She simply decided she deserved more and went after it. Her legacy was using her success to lift others. Madam Walker could have kept her wealth, lived comfortably, ignored the struggles of her community. Instead, she became one of the greatest civil rights advocates of her time, using her money and influence to fight for justice. Her legacy was redefining what it meant to be a black woman in America. Before Madam Walker, images of black women in products and advertisements were often racist caricatures. Madam Walker showed black women as beautiful, elegant, powerful, and successful. After her death, her daughter Alelia continued the company and transformed Villa Luaro into a cultural center during the Harlem Renaissance. The mansion received some of the greatest black artists, writers, and intellectuals of the time: Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, W.E.B. Du Bois, among other many. The MADAM C.J. Walker Company continued operating for decades. Although it was eventually sold and the name changed hands, the impact remained. Today, there is a renewal of interest in her story and brand. In 2020, Netflix released Self-Made, inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker, a miniseries starring Octavia Spencer that introduced her story to a new generation. The show wasn't perfectly historical, but it captured Madam Walker's spirit, her determination, her vision, her refusal to be limited. But perhaps the most powerful lesson from Madam C.J. Walker's life is this: no matter where you come from, no matter what the world says you can or cannot be, you have the power to write your own story. Madam Walker was born in absolute poverty, daughter of enslaved people. She lost her parents early, had minimal education, worked the most humble jobs. By all external standards, she had no chance of success. But she refused to accept that verdict. She looked at her problems and saw opportunities. She transformed her pain into purpose. She built a business not just to get rich, but to create opportunities for other people like her. And when she achieved success, she didn't forget her roots. She didn't become the exception that proves the rule, saying, "I made it, so anyone can." She recognized the systemic barriers and fought to tear them down. She used her platform to amplify voices that were silenced. Today, when you face obstacles that seem insurmountable, when the world says you can't, when circumstances conspire against you, remember Sarah Breedlove, who became Madam C.J. Walker. Remember that she started washing clothes for $1 a day and built a multi-million-dollar empire. Remember that she was rejected by every investor and still found a way. Remember that she was silenced and still made her voice heard. Her journey teaches us that success isn't about where you start, but about your determination to keep moving forward. It teaches us that our greatest pain can become our greatest purpose. It teaches us that when we help others rise, we all elevate ourselves. Madam C.J. Walker didn't just change her own life, she changed the course of history. She proved that a black woman could be CEO, philanthropist, activist, and icon. She opened doors that remained open for future generations. And perhaps most importantly, she did all of this without losing her humanity, without forgetting where she came from, without letting success harden her heart to the suffering of others. This is the story of Madam C.J. Walker, a story of impossible transformation, a story that reminds us that no dream is too big, no obstacle too insurmountable, no person too unlikely to change the world. Her life is a testament to the power of human determination, and her legacy continues to inspire all of us to dream bigger, fight harder, and never ever accept the limitations that others try to impose on us. Because if Sarah Breedlove, born on a cotton plantation in 1867, could become Madam C.J. Walker, one of the most influential women of her time, then what is impossible for you? The answer is nothing. Absolutely nothing. The story of Madam C.J. Walker transcends time and space. More than a century after her death, her life continues to resonate with profound power, inspiring new generations of entrepreneurs, activists, and dreamers around the world. When we look at her journey, we see much more than the story of a successful businesswoman. We see a masterclass in resilience, a manual on how to transform adversity into advantage, a living testimony that the human spirit is capable of overcoming any obstacle when fueled by determination and purpose. Think about what Madam Walker achieved in an era when the deck was completely stacked against her. She was black in a deeply racist America. She was a woman in a world dominated by men. She was poor in a society that worshipped wealth and despised poverty. She had minimal formal education in a time when credentials mattered immensely. By any logical calculation, she should have failed. The odds were overwhelmingly against her. But Madam Walker didn't play by the world's rules. She created her own. One of the most powerful aspects of her story is how she redefined success itself. For Madam Walker, success wasn't just about personal wealth or status. It was about collective elevation. Every time she hired a new employee, trained a new agent, or donated to a worthy cause, she was expanding the definition of what it meant to succeed. She understood something that many successful people forget. True wealth isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give away. And Madam Walker gave generously. Not just money, but opportunity, dignity, hope. Consider the Walker agents. These weren't just saleswomen working for a paycheck. They were women who, for the first time in their lives, had control over their economic destinies. They could work their own hours, set their own goals, build their own businesses. Many of them went from making pennies as domestic workers to earning what were, for that time, substantial incomes. But more than the money, these women gained something invaluable: dignity. When they walked into a home or community center to demonstrate Madam Walker's products, they weren't servants, they were businesswomen. They weren't asking for charity, they were offering value. This psychological shift cannot be overstated. Madam Walker created what we might today call a social enterprise, a business that was profitable, but also had a clear social mission. She proved that you don't have to choose between doing good and doing well. You can build a successful business while simultaneously uplifting your community. Her approach to business was revolutionary in other ways, too. At a time when most companies treated employees as disposable resources, Madam Walker invested in her people. She provided training, mentorship, and ongoing support. She celebrated their successes publicly. She created a culture where women supported each other rather than competing destructively. This wasn't just good ethics, it was good business. Her agents were loyal, motivated, and passionate about the products because they felt valued and respected. They weren't just selling hair care products, they were part of a movement, a community, a family. Madam Walker's activism is another crucial part of her legacy. She understood that economic empowerment alone wasn't enough. What good was wealth if you lived in constant fear of violence? What good was a successful business if your children couldn't get a quality education? What good was financial independence if you couldn't vote? So Madam Walker used her wealth and influence to fight for civil rights.
When racial violence erupted, she didn't stay silent in her mansion. She went to Washington to demand action. When organizations needed funding to fight segregation and discrimination, she opened her checkbook. When young black artists needed support, she became their patron. She showed that successful business people have a responsibility to their communities. She rejected the idea that business and activism should be separate. For her, they were inseparable. Both were about creating a better world. Her magnificent mansion, Villa Luaro, symbolized this philosophy perfectly. Yes, it was a symbol of her success, a statement that a black woman could achieve the highest levels of wealth and sophistication. But it was also a gathering place, a sanctuary where black intellectuals, artists, and activists could meet, collaborate, and dream without the constraints of a racist society. The Harlem Renaissance, one of the most important cultural movements in American history, was partly nurtured in spaces like Villa Luaro. Madam Walker and her daughter Eulalia created environments where black creativity could flourish, where black voices could be heard, where black dignity could be celebrated. This is true legacy looks like. It's not just about what you accomplish in your own lifetime, but about the seeds you plant that continue to grow long after you're gone. When we study Madam Walker's life, certain principles emerge that are as relevant today as they were a century ago. First, solve your own problems. Madam Walker didn't wait for someone else to create a solution for her air loss. She experimented, learned, and created her own products. The best businesses often come from entrepreneurs solving problems they personally experienced. Second, see the bigger market. Madam Walker recognized that millions of black women faced similar hair care challenges. She didn't just create a product for herself, she created a solution for an entire underserved market. Third, invest in people. Madam Walker's business model was built on empowering other women. She understood that her success was tied to their success. This created a virtuous cycle of growth and opportunity. Fourth, use your platform for good. As Madam Walker's wealth and influence grew, she didn't retreat into comfort. She amplified her activism, fought harder for justice, gave more generously to worthy causes. Fifth, tell your story authentically. Madam Walker didn't hide her humble origins or her struggles. She shared them openly, creating deep connections with her customers and agents who saw themselves in her journey. Sixth, defy expectations. At every turn, people told her what she couldn't do. She responded by doing it anyway. She didn't ask for permission to succeed. She simply succeeded. Seventh, create your own path. When traditional routes were closed to her, Madam Walker didn't give up. She found new ways forward, created new models, invented new possibilities. These principles aren't just historical curiosities, they're actionable wisdom for anyone facing obstacles today. The specifics of our challenges may differ from those Madam Walker faced, but the fundamental dynamics remain the same. We all face people who doubt us. We all encounter systems that seem designed to keep us down. We all experience moments when success seems impossible. In these moments, Madam Walker's life offers a powerful counter-narrative. Her story tells us that external circumstances don't have to determine our destiny. Yes, they matter. Racism, sexism, poverty, lack of education all create real barriers. Madam Walker never denied this, but she refused to let these barriers define what was possible. She took inventory of what she had, her own experience, her determination, her ability to connect with people, her willingness to work harder than anyone else, and she built from there. She didn't wait for perfect conditions. She didn't wait for someone to give her permission. She simply started. And this is perhaps the most important lesson. You don't need perfect conditions to begin. You don't need unlimited resources. You don't need everyone's approval to pursue your dreams. You need what Madam Walker had, the courage to take that first step, the resilience to keep going when things get hard, the wisdom to help others as you climb, and the faith that your life can be about more than just survival. It can be about transformation, impact, and legacy. Madam C.J. Walker's life is a gift to all of us. It's a reminder that we're capable of more than we imagine, that our circumstances don't have to define our destinies, that success is sweetest when it's shared, and that a life well lived can inspire generations yet unborn. So whatever you're facing today, whatever obstacles seem insurmountable, whatever dreams seem impossible, remember her. Remember that she started with less than you have and achieved more than most people dare to dream. Remember that she transformed pain into purpose, obstacles into opportunities, and a life of hardship into a legacy of hope. And now ask yourself, if not now, when? If not me, who? Your journey begins with a single step. Make it count. The world is waiting for what only you can give. This is the eternal legacy of Madam C.J. Walker. Not just what she accomplished, but the permission she gave all of us to dream bigger, reach higher, and never ever accept that anything is impossible. Her story is our story. Her triumph is our possibility. Her legacy is our inheritance. Now, go write your own chapter in this ongoing story of human potential and determination. The pen is in your hands.
Subscribe to the channel because we'll have new videos every day until you reach your goal. You are capable.